If you've ever tried to lose a stubborn layer of belly fat, you've probably spent hours doing crunches. It makes logical sense. Work the muscle, burn the fat sitting right on top of it. But no matter how many sit-ups you do, that fat layer often remains unchanged. We intuitively believe that a working muscle will pull energy straight from the fat layer resting directly above it. Biology functions differently. Muscles don't have localized pathways reaching into neighboring fat deposits to draw out calories. Human energy systems are entirely systemic. The reason the abdomen is so uniquely resistant to exercise is because that padding isn't a single layer of tissue. It is actually two distinct, entirely separate types of fat. Approaching this as a localized mechanical problem is why traditional abdominal routines often fail to change the waistline. Solving the problem requires looking at the actual physiological layers at work. This cross-section of the abdomen shows the geography of the problem. The soft outer layer you can pinch is subcutaneous fat. Beneath that is the abdominal muscle wall, and deeper still is the visceral fat. That outer subcutaneous layer is biologically stubborn. It contains a high density of alpha-2 receptors, which inhibit the release of fat into the bloodstream, and a much lower concentration of beta-2 receptors, which promote that release. But if we bypass the muscle wall and look at the visceral fat, we find a much more active tissue. This deep fat acts as a dynamic endocrine organ, constantly secreting chemicals directly onto your surrounding organs. It uses the portal vein as a direct pipeline to dump a heavy flow of fatty acids straight into your liver, which can quickly overwhelm the organ's processing capacity. This tissue also reduces the production of protective hormones like adiponectin while generating local cortisol. That cortisol signals the body to store even more fat in the abdominal cavity, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of storage. This is why a person can have a normal body weight on the scale, but still be at risk for chronic disease. Visceral fat is a hidden metabolic threat that can exist regardless of how you look in the mirror. Since fat cannot be burned locally, we have to look at the process of how a stored calorie actually leaves the body. When you create a systemic energy deficit, your body releases adrenaline. This activates an enzyme inside your fat cells called hormone-sensitive lipase, or HSL, which breaks down stored triglycerides into separate free fatty acids and a glycerol backbone. Once freed, those fatty acids exit the cell and enter the systemic bloodstream, traveling to be used for energy by working tissues throughout the body. That fat doesn't simply disappear or turn into muscle. It undergoes a specific chemical transformation. When those fatty acids are broken down for energy, the primary byproducts are water and carbon dioxide. In fact, 80% of the carbon from that fat is eventually exhaled straight out of your lungs. Fat loss is essentially a respiratory process. The majority of that mass is literally exhaled. Once the body's hormonal environment allows those fat cells to open, the baseline requirement for triggering this systemic release is a sustained caloric deficit. This relies on the first law of thermodynamics, which dictates that energy cannot be created or destroyed. If you consume less energy than your body requires for daily function, it is forced to draw from its own stored reserves. But while total calories dictate the overall loss, the type of food dictates the efficiency of the process. This is known as the thermic effect of food. Protein requires the body to expend nearly 30% of its own calories just to be digested and processed, a much higher metabolic cost than fats or carbohydrates. A high-protein diet forces the body to burn a significant percentage of those calories during digestion, while helping to preserve the muscle tissue that maintains your resting metabolic rate. While diet controls your total weight, vigorous aerobic training acts as a highly specific tool to reduce visceral fat. In a study of vigorous cycling, participants' body weight remained stationary, but their visceral fat dropped by 50%. A rising trend line also shows insulin sensitivity improved by 41%, proving internal health improves even when the scale doesn't. One final biological variable regulates exactly how and where you store abdominal fat: sleep duration. In clinical trials, restricting sleep to 4 hours causes a severe shift in hormones. Leptin, which signals fullness, drops, while cortisol, which promotes fat storage, spikes. This environment reliably drives a 300-calorie daily surplus. This specific hormonal state encourages the body to stockpile that excess energy as visceral fat. You cannot bypass the biological reality of abdominal fat with sit-ups. But by combining a high-protein deficit with vigorous aerobic training and consistent sleep, you provide the hormonal signals necessary to dismantle these stores from the inside out.
If you found this video helpful, subscribe to Healthy Lifestyle RX for simple, science-backed health explainers. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next explainer.